Our story starts about 1300 years ago with Indian mathematicians. And when I say Indian mathematicians, I'm not talking about Native Americans. I'm talking about like actual Indians from India. So anyway, Indian mathematicians were studying nature and the world around them. And what they noticed is that everything around them that grew naturally could be expressed mathematically. And it could be expressed mathematically through a sequence of numbers. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, to like infinity. They take the sequence of numbers and they do the math and they realize that it breaks down into a ratio. 1.618, also known as phi, also known as the golden ratio. Fast forward to the year 1202. There's this guy named Leonardo Fibonacci. He takes this concept and he kind of pretty much makes it well known in the West. What ended up happening is it becomes known as a Fibonacci ratio and the Fibonacci sequence when we talk about the sequence of numbers. And when we express the ratio in a drawing, it looks like a spiral. And that spiral is known as a Fibonacci spiral. So the significance of the Fibonacci spiral is this. Everything in nature obeys the sequence, the spiral, and the ratio. And an example of this is sunflowers. So the florets in sunflowers actually grow in perfect spirals of 21, 34, and 55. You can also see the same spiral in pine cones. You can see it in pineapples. And you can even see it in shells like the Nautilus shell. So now that you know what the Fibonacci sequence is and what the golden ratio is, we'll get into composition. Very close to the golden ratio, but not exactly the golden ratio, is the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds is just basically the golden ratio dumbed down in a way that makes it very easy to understand. Now, I'm sure that most of you guys, if not all of you guys, are familiar with the rule of thirds because you see it anytime you pick up a camera. You see this tic-tac-toe grid of these squares. So the reason for this grid is that it breaks up your frame into thirds. The reason for this is to basically give you guidelines as to where to frame your subject in the composition of your photo. The general rule of thumb is that you want to line up your subject on one of these lines, more particularly where one of these lines intersect, so at one of the points. Right now, we have this light pole focused in the center of the frame. This is an okay shot, but based on the rule of thirds, this shot is really not that interesting. So as I move over to the right and you see me line up this light pole, you see that this photo becomes a whole lot more interesting. So this is basically why we want to use that rule of thirds. It's just basically helping you to create a more dynamic, interesting picture. When you're doing cell phone photography, one thing that you want to always be mindful of is the light and the lighting conditions. So since you're taking a photo with a cell phone, typically you don't have control over the light, so you have to make do with the light that you have available. And so one thing that I always notice that people do is that they always have their light shining into the lens of the camera, and you don't want to do this. What you want to do is you want to pay attention to the light at all times, and you never want the light shining into the lens of the camera, because what happens is you get this very washed out image, much like what you see here. I'm standing with the sun to my back, and I'm trying to do a selfie with the photo, and because the sun is to my back, the light is shining into the lens and you can't really see me. But notice what happens when I turn around. When I turn around, the sun is shining me, I am the subject, the sun is not shining into the lens, I'm illuminated, and this looks much better. However, that brings up another thing that happens when people take cell phone photos, is you guys have a lot of shadows. Right here, you can see the shadow that is being cast by my arm because I'm holding the phone like this. Don't make that mistake. Always be mindful of the shadows inside your photo. One trick that I use when I'm doing photography is I look at the ground, because the ground will give me a good indication of where the light is and what's happening. As you can see, this church is casting a shadow. Because this church is casting a shadow, I have sunlight on one side and I have a full shadow on the other side. When I'm doing my photography, I pay attention to the ground. And so when I look at the ground and I see that there is a straight shadow, I know that if I move my subject into the shadow, that I have nice diffused light. Now, what I mean by diffused light is the light particles are spread out more evenly. So the more diffused light is, the more evenly the light particles are spread out. which creates more beautiful light. This is why sometimes you are on your phone and you're like, oh man, I got perfect lighting, or I got good lighting. What you know as good lighting is typically really well diffused light. This is your phone. This phone is in your pocket. This phone is in your hand, and it's probably the most gross thing that you own, period. And the thing about that is your hands and your face and everything has oils on it. And what happens is those oils deposit on the lens of your phone. And so when you go to take a photo, I know that you've seen photos like this, photos that look cloudy and hazy and all of that. And the reason that you get this cloudy, hazy photo is because your lens is dirty. All you really need to do is just take the edge of your shirt, clean it off. And what you will notice is a very, very big difference in how clear that is. So clean your phone, you'll take a much better photo. The next thing that we want to talk about right now is editing the photo, because obviously the whole purpose of taking a freaking picture is to put it on Instagram. Cameras were invented so that you could take Instagram photos. So I'm going to take you through my Instagram workflow of how I edit one of my photos. And I already have a photo preloaded right here, so I'm just going to go ahead and show y'all here. Now, just so you know, this was shot about 2 years ago with an iPhone 10 Plus, I think it was. So the first thing that you want to do is, I don't know if you guys know, but at the bottom left-hand corner of the photo, you can push that button and it shows you more of the photo. And if you put your thumb on the photo, you'll get that grid that I was telling you about. So now I know that that's exactly where I want. My face is like perfectly composed based on what I told you. And the first thing that I typically do is add a little bit of lux. Next, I'm gonna go to edit. If you notice, I skipped over using the freaking filters because the Instagram filters suck. So I'm gonna go ahead and adjust the brightness a little bit. We all know what brightness is. You don't need an explanation. I'm just gonna take it down just a touch. The structure. All structure is basically just adding a little bit more detail or texture to the photo. I'll just go ahead and take this on down to about 5, just to give it a little bit more detail. Now vignette, if I take the vignette all the way over to the right, if you look at the edges, you'll see the edges get darker. This just kind of adds a little bit of depth to your photo and just makes it look a little bit more interesting. Lastly, I might adjust the sharpening. So I'm just gonna adjust the sharpening a little bit, make it a little bit more sharp. And that just makes it like a little bit more crisp and clean. So I'll put up on the screen a before and after of this photo. So here's a before and the after. I'm gonna go ahead and post this photo so you guys can see it. Well, actually, this photo has already been posted because I'm about to post it now before I edit. And I hope that you guys could use some of this information. Keep in mind, I come out with a new video every Friday. It might drop on Saturday, depending on how long I'm working on it and how much work I gotta do. But every Friday I have a new video. So in the comments, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought about this video or what video topic you think I should do next week. Thanks again for checking me out, y'all. Be sure to follow me and make sure that you turn on the post notifications so that you get all of my content. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.